It was late October 1987 in the small, fog-covered town of Millersburg, Oregon. The air was cold and damp, and the streets were lined with fiery orange and yellow leaves. In the heart of the town, surrounded by thick, towering pines, stood Willow Creek Lodge, a crumbling old building that had been abandoned for nearly 50 years. Martha Jenkins, a 34-year-old history professor from Portland, arrived in Millersburg just before sunset. She had heard the stories about Willow Creek Lodge, a place where, in 1938, an entire family of 5 had vanished, without a trace. Locals whispered of strange lights flickering in the windows at night and shadowy figures moving in the forest. Despite the warnings, Martha was determined to investigate. By the time she reached the lodge, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was painted in hues of deep purple and black. The old wooden doors creaked as she pushed them open, and the faint scent of mildew and decay greeted her. With her flashlight in hand, she stepped inside. The lodge was eerily quiet, save for the occasional drip of water echoing in the distance. The wooden floorboards groaned under her weight as she made her way through the main hall. Faded wallpaper peeled from the walls, and old photographs, their faces obscured by time, hung crookedly. Each creak and whisper of the wind seemed louder in the oppressive silence. In the dining room, Martha found a large, dust-covered table. Plates and silverware were still set as if the family had planned to return for dinner. A faded calendar on the wall was stuck on October 15th, 1938, the very day the family disappeared. She felt a chill run down her spine. As she climbed the grand staircase to the second floor, her flashlight flickered. "Not now," she muttered, shaking it. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from one of the rooms at the end of the hallway. Her breath caught. "Hello," she called, her voice trembling. There was no answer. Summoning her courage, she approached the room. The door was slightly ajar, and she pushed it open cautiously. Inside, the room was empty except for an old rocking chair, which swayed gently as if, her voice trembling as it echoed back at her. There was no reply. The hallway stretched ahead, dimly illuminated by her faltering flashlight, and the air grew colder with every step she took toward the noise. The door at the end of the hall was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness. As Martha approached, her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She pushed the door open slowly, and it creaked on its rusted hinges. Inside was a bedroom frozen in time. A 4-poster bed stood in the center, its sheets yellowed with age. A child's doll sat upright on a rocking chair near the window, its glass eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. But what drew Martha's attention most was a diary lying open on the nightstand. She picked it up carefully, brushing away decades of dust. The diary belonged to Lillian Harper, the youngest daughter of the family. The last entry read, October 15th, 1938. Mother says we shouldn't go into the woods, but I saw the lights again tonight. They were so bright, like lanterns dancing. I heard whispers too, calling my name. I'm going to see what they want. I'll be back soon. Asterisk. Martha felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. She spun around, her flashlight flickering wildly, and found herself plunged into near darkness. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice breaking. The room grew unnaturally cold, and her breath came out in visible puffs. The rocking chair began to move on its own, creaking rhythmically as if someone unseen had taken a seat. The doll tumbled to the floor, its porcelain face cracking on impact. Panicking, Martha lunged for the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She felt a presence behind her, an oppressive weight that made the air feel thick. She turned slowly, and in the corner of the room stood a shadowy figure, its eyes glowing faintly like the lights described in the diary. The figure took a step forward, and Martha stumbled backward, pressing herself against the door. "Stay away!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. The figure extended a hand, skeletal and gnarled, pointing directly at her. A deafening whisper filled the room, layered with many voices. Asterisk, you shouldn't have come. Asterisk. With a final, desperate push, the door flew open, and Martha tumbled into the hallway. She scrambled to her feet and bolted down the stairs, her flashlight clattering to the ground behind her. The lodge seemed to groan as if alive, the walls vibrating with an otherworldly hum. Martha didn't stop until she was outside, gasping for breath under the cold night sky. The lodge stood silent and still, its windows dark. She could barely comprehend what had happened. Clutching the diary tightly, she ran back to her car and sped away, never looking back. In the weeks that followed, Martha attempted to research the Harpers further, but every lead ended in a dead end. The diary, now in her possession, became a source of unease. Pages began to fill themselves with writing she didn't remember being there. Whispers echoed in her home at night, and strange lights flickered outside her windows. No one enters Willow Creek Lodge anymore, but locals say that on dark, moonless nights, you can still see lights flickering inside and hear the faint creak of a rocking chair through the still night air. Years passed, and Martha couldn't shake the haunting memories of Willow Creek Lodge. She had locked the diary away in her attic, hoping to forget it entirely. But the strange occurrences continued. Her lights would flicker at the same time every night, 3:15 a.m., and faint footsteps echoed in her hallway, even when she was alone. The whispers became louder, and the sensation of being watched followed her wherever she went. By 1990, Martha was a shadow of her former self. She had lost her job, her friends had distanced themselves, and she rarely left her home. One night, unable to bear the torment any longer, she decided to return to the lodge. She convinced herself that confronting whatever haunted her might finally put an end to it. The drive to Millersburg was shrouded in an eerie silence. The once vivid autumn colors were now muted, the town seemingly forgotten by time. When she arrived at Willow Creek Lodge, it was as though nothing had changed. The building loomed ominously under a cloud-covered sky, its windows dark and lifeless. Clutching a lantern and a small bag of sage, advice she had gotten from a local mystic, Martha stepped inside once again. The air felt heavier than before, as though the lodge itself were aware of her return. She moved cautiously through the halls, her lantern casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. As she reached the second floor, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They seemed to come from every direction, overlapping in a cacophony of unintelligible words. But this time, they weren't just calling her name. They were pleading, "Help us, find us." Heart pounding, Martha followed the voices to the same room where she had found the diary years ago. The door was wide open, revealing the same unsettling scene. The rocking chair, the broken doll, and the four-poster bed. But now, the bed sheets were rumpled as if someone had recently lain there. She lit the sage and began to walk through the room, muttering prayers she barely remembered. The whispers grew louder, almost angry, and the lantern's light flickered wildly. Suddenly, the floor beneath her feet felt unstable, and she heard a deep, guttural sound, like the groan of the earth splitting open. The rocking chair began to move violently, slamming back and forth, as if thrown by an unseen force. The doll's shattered face seemed to watch her, its remaining eye glinting in the dim light. And then, the figure from before appeared, no longer just a shadow. Its features were grotesque and twisted, a horrifying amalgamation of human and something far darker. Martha screamed, dropping the sage as the figure reached for her. But instead of harming her, it pointed toward the floor. She looked down to see the wood splitting apart, revealing a dark, gaping hole. From the abyss, faint cries echoed, children's voices calling for help. Summoning every ounce of courage, Martha knelt by the hole. She could see faint, ghostly figures below, Lillian and her family, their faces pale and desperate. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't know." The figure behind her spoke, its voice layered with countless others. Asterisk, they were taken. You must break the cycle. Asterisk, before she could respond, the lantern shattered, plunging the room into darkness. The force pulled her backward, and she hit her head against the wall, knocking her unconscious. When Martha awoke, she was lying on the front lawn of the lodge. The building was silent and still, as though nothing had happened. In her hand, she clutched an old rusted key. She didn't know where it came from, but she felt a deep sense of urgency to use it. Days later, she returned to the lodge with a team of investigators. Using the key, they discovered a hidden door in the basement leading to a small, bricked-up room. Inside were the remains of the Harper family, their skeletal hands still clutching each other. The discovery made headlines, and the lodge was condemned shortly after. Martha felt a bittersweet sense of relief, knowing the Harpers could finally rest. But the whispers never truly left her. Even now, late at night, she swears she can still hear Lillian's voice, faint and distant, calling her name. Years passed, but Martha could never fully escape the shadow of Willow Creek Lodge. Even after the Harpers' remains were recovered and given a proper burial, the haunting memories lingered. The whispers grew quieter, but they never disappeared completely, as if the lodge had left an indelible mark on her soul. In 1995, Martha moved to the East Coast, hoping a fresh start might help her reclaim some semblance of normalcy. She found a small, quiet apartment in Providence, Rhode Island, and took up freelance writing to make ends meet. Her life became a monotonous routine: work, sleep, repeat. She avoided discussing the lodge or the Harpers with anyone, though the story continued to haunt local legends in Millersburg. One chilly autumn evening, Martha received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Her hands trembled as she studied the image. It was the dining room of Willow Creek Lodge, the table still set as it had been the night she first entered. But this time, there were 5 faint, ghostly figures seated at the table. At the head sat a tall man in a dark suit, his face shrouded in shadows, and at his side was Lillian, her hollow eyes staring directly at the camera. A note was scrawled on the back of the photograph. Asterisk, it's not over. Asterisk. Martha tried to dismiss it as a cruel prank. Maybe someone had heard about her connection to the lodge and wanted to scare her. But that night, as she lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent than ever. They seemed to come from inside the walls, growing in intensity until she couldn't bear it. At precisely 3:15 a.m., her bedroom door creaked open on its own, and the icy chill she had come to dread swept through the room. Terrified, Martha grabbed a flashlight and bolted for the door. But when she stepped into the hallway, she wasn't in her apartment anymore. She was back in the lodge. The hallway was endless, stretching in both directions, with no end in sight. Doors lined the walls, each slightly ajar, and faint cries echoed from within. No, this isn't real," she whispered, clutching her head. But the cold, damp air and the oppressive darkness told her otherwise. She stumbled forward, peering into one of the rooms. Inside, she saw Lillian sitting on the edge of her bed, clutching the diary tightly to her chest. Her eyes were wide with fear as she whispered, "Asterisk, he's coming. You have to stop him. Asterisk." Before Martha could respond, the room dissolved into darkness, and she found herself in the lodge's basement. The bricked-up room was open again, but the skeletons of the Harper family were gone. In their place stood the tall man from the photograph, his face still obscured. His presence was suffocating, and the air seemed to hum with malice. He raised a hand, and the whispers coalesced into a deafening roar. Martha collapsed to her knees, clutching her ears. "Why won't you leave me alone?" she screamed. The man spoke for the first time, his voice deep and hollow, echoing like a cavern. "Asterisk, because you opened the door, and now it can never be closed. Asterisk." Martha's vision blurred as the room spun around her. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the man stepping toward her, his shadow engulfing her completely. When she woke, she was in her apartment, the morning sun streaming through the windows. For a brief moment, she thought it might have been a dream, but the photograph was still on her nightstand, along with the rusted key from the lodge. Her hands were smeared with dirt, as if she'd been digging. From that day on, Martha lived in constant fear, knowing the lodge would never truly release her. She became a recluse, avoiding contact with anyone who might unknowingly become involved. The whispers followed her wherever she went, and the lights continued to flicker at 3:15 a.m. Some say Martha disappeared in 1997, her apartment left untouched, save for a single item left on the kitchen counter, the rusted key. Others claim she returned to the lodge one final time, determined to end the haunting once and for all. Whatever happened to her, one thing is certain. Willow Creek Lodge remains, its doors forever waiting for the next unfortunate soul to enter. And the lights, they say, still flicker in the windows on moonless nights. Years after Martha's disappearance, Willow Creek Lodge became a symbol of local folklore, a place whispered about but never approached. The stories of the Harper family and Martha Jenkins grew, embellished over time, but the truth remained shrouded in mystery. Despite the warnings, the lodge continued to draw the curious and the thrill-seekers, those who didn't believe or simply craved a brush with the unknown. In October 2003, a group of college students from Salem decided to spend the night at the infamous lodge. Jake, a self-proclaimed skeptic, led the group, insisting that the stories were nothing more than small-town superstition. His friends Emily, Sarah, and Chris were less certain but followed, lured by the promise of a Halloween thrill. The four arrived at the lodge just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was heavy, and the towering pines cast long, skeletal shadows across the dirt path. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a bottle of cheap whiskey, they pushed open the creaking front doors and stepped inside. "See," Jake said, his voice echoing in the empty hall. "Just an old, abandoned house. Nothing to worry about." Emily shivered. "I don't know, it feels wrong. Like we shouldn't be here." Sarah laughed nervously. "Come on, Em. Don't chicken out now. We've got all night to prove Jake wrong." The group explored the lodge, their laughter and chatter masking the growing sense of unease. They found the dining room, untouched since Martha's discovery decades earlier. The table was still set, the plates coated in a thick layer of dust. Sarah snapped a photo with her phone, but when she checked the screen, her face paled. "What's wrong?" Chris asked, peering over her shoulder. The photo showed the dining room as they saw it, except for one chilling detail. The faint outline of a man seated at the head of the table, his face obscured by shadows. "It's just a glitch," Jake said quickly, though his voice wavered. "These old places mess with electronics." They moved on, climbing the creaking staircase to the second floor. The air grew colder with each step, and their flashlights flickered, struggling against the encroaching darkness. At the end of the hallway, the door to the infamous bedroom stood open, as if inviting them in. Inside, the room was just as the stories described: the four-poster bed, the rocking chair, and the shattered doll. Emily froze. "I don't like this," she whispered. "We need to leave." Jake rolled his eyes. "It's just a room, Emily. There's nothing here." But as the words left his mouth, the rocking chair began to move, creaking back and forth on its own. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats. Then, faint whispers began to fill the air, low and indistinct, like voices speaking from another room. "Jake, we need to go," Chris said, his voice trembling. Before anyone could move, the door slammed shut behind them, trapping them inside. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and swirling around them. The temperature dropped sharply, and their flashlights flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. Suddenly, the doll on the floor shifted, as if pushed by an invisible hand. Its cracked face seemed to watch them, its remaining eye glinting in the dim light. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with a face obscured in darkness, his presence filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Emily screamed, clutching Sarah's arm. "Please let us go," she begged. The man raised a hand, and the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a deafening silence. He pointed to the floor, where the wood began to splinter and crack, revealing the same dark, gaping hole that Martha had seen years earlier. Faint cries echoed from the abyss, growing louder with each passing second. Jake, frozen with fear, finally broke. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to disturb you," he shouted. The man's hollow voice echoed through the room. "You came uninvited. Now you'll stay." The floor gave way beneath them, and the group plunged into darkness. Days later, the students' abandoned car was found on the road leading to the lodge, but there was no sign of them. Police searched the lodge, but found nothing unusual, no sign of the students or any evidence of what had happened. The disappearance of the college students sent shockwaves through Millersburg, though many locals weren't surprised. The lodge takes who it wants, some would say in hushed tones, as though fearing the lodge could hear them. Others blamed the students' recklessness, but no one dared to investigate further. Not the police, not the search teams, not even the families of the missing. By 2010, the lodge had become infamous across the state, a magnet for paranormal investigators, thrill seekers, and amateur ghost hunters. Most who ventured near the property reported feeling uneasy, but left unharmed. Still, the stories of those who disappeared kept the truly brave or foolish coming back. Among them was a documentary filmmaker named Rachel Marks. She had made a name for herself uncovering real-life mysteries, and Willow Creek Lodge was her next target. Determined to uncover the truth, Rachel assembled a small team. Ethan, her tech-savvy cameraman, Lauren, a psychic medium, and Marcus, a skeptical journalist. The four of them arrived in Millersburg on October 31st, 2012, Halloween night. The town was eerily quiet as they drove toward the lodge. Rachel filmed the journey, narrating their approach. Willow Creek Lodge has stood abandoned for over 70 years, but the stories surrounding it have never faded. Tonight, we'll uncover the secrets it holds. They reached the lodge just before sundown. The air was unnaturally still, and the surrounding forest seemed darker than it should have been. The group set up their equipment just outside the lodge. Cameras, audio recorders, and EMF meters. Lauren stood apart, her eyes fixed on the building. "It doesn't want us here," she murmured. Rachel turned to her. "What do you mean?" Lauren hesitated. "There's something ancient. It's not just spirits. The lodge is alive, and it's hungry." Rachel dismissed the warning. "That's exactly why we're here. Let's get inside." The team entered the lodge as the last rays of sunlight faded. The familiar scent of mildew and decay filled the air, and their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. Ethan set up cameras in key areas: the dining room, the staircase, and the infamous second-floor bedroom. Meanwhile, Lauren walked slowly through the lodge, her hand outstretched as if feeling the air. "There's so much pain here," she whispered. "So much fear. The walls, they're listening." Rachel, unfazed, pressed on. "Let's head to the dining room first." The team gathered around the dusty table. Marcus, the skeptic, smirked as he waved an EMF meter over the surface. Nothing. No ghosts here. But as he spoke, the tableware rattled, and a single plate slid across the table, stopping inches from him. Everyone froze. Did you see that?" Ethan stammered, his camera shaking in his hands. Lauren closed her eyes, her voice trembling. "They're here. All of them." The whispers began soon after, faint at first, but growing louder. The group followed the sounds to the staircase, where Rachel's camera captured fleeting shadows darting up the steps. They climbed to the second floor, their footsteps heavy with dread. When they reached the bedroom, the door was wide open. Inside, the rocking chair swayed gently, though there was no breeze. On the floor, the doll lay in pieces, its shattered face seemingly staring at them. Lauren knelt by the doll, her face pale. "It's her," she said softly. "Lillian. She's trapped." Ethan's EMF meter spiked suddenly, the device beeping wildly. The temperature plummeted, and the lanterns they had brought flickered. Rachel's camera captured the tall man standing in the corner of the room, his face still obscured by shadow. He raised his hand, and the whispers stopped, replaced by an oppressive silence. Lauren screamed, clutching her head. "He's here. He's coming for us." The floor began to shake, and the walls seemed to close in. Rachel tried to grab Lauren, but an unseen force pulled the psychic toward the rocking chair. The others could only watch in horror as Lauren's body went rigid, her eyes rolling back. Her voice changed, layered with many others. Asterisk, you were warned. Asterisk. The floor beneath them cracked, revealing the same dark void from the stories. Ghostly hands reached out, clawing at the air. Rachel grabbed Ethan and Marcus, dragging them toward the door. "We have to get out," she yelled. But as they fled, the lodge seemed to twist and shift around them. Hallways stretched endlessly, and doors led to nowhere. The whispers returned, louder than ever, chanting unintelligible words. The air grew thick, making it hard to breathe. Rachel turned back for Lauren, but the psychic was gone. The rocking chair sat still empty. A cold voice echoed through the lodge, deep and resonant. Asterisk, you cannot escape. Asterisk. When dawn broke, only Rachel emerged from the forest, disheveled and barely coherent. She refused to speak of what happened inside the lodge, but her footage told part of the story. The cameras captured fleeting images of shadows, the tall man, and Lauren's final moments. Rachel disappeared 2 weeks later. Her apartment was found abandoned, with the footage left on her desk. No trace of Ethan, Marcus, or Lauren was ever found. Willow Creek Lodge remains abandoned, its legend darker than ever. Locals say the lodge now claims entire groups at once, and on Halloween nights, the cries of the lost echo through the forest, blending with the whispers of the Harper family. And yet, the lodge still waits, its doors open, ready for the next visitor who dares to enter. The legend of Willow Creek Lodge continued to grow, cementing its place as one of the most infamous haunted locations in the United States. Paranormal enthusiasts, adrenaline junkies, and even seasoned investigators avoided it, deterred by the chilling accounts of those who dared to enter and never returned. In 2020, during the height of a pandemic that kept the world indoors, a social media influencer named Tyler Grayson decided to break the isolation monotony by live streaming an overnight stay at the lodge. Tyler had built his following by taking on extreme challenges, mocking the supernatural, and calling out myths as hoaxes. "This is going to blow up," he said to his 2.5 million followers as he filmed himself driving into Millersburg in his beat-up Jeep. "We've all heard the ghost stories, but tonight I'm going to prove that it's all just a bunch of urban legend nonsense." Tyler arrived at Willow Creek Lodge just as the sun dipped below the horizon. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark and lifeless, the air around it unnaturally still. His live stream chat was filled with comments, ranging from enthusiastic encouragement to warnings to turn back. "This is it," Tyler announced, his phone camera trained on the lodge as he stepped out of his Jeep. "The famous Willow Creek Lodge. One night here, and I'll show you all there's nothing to fear." Inside the lodge, Tyler's flashlight revealed peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and layers of dust. He explored room by room, narrating his experience for his audience. "So far, nothing but an old, creepy building," he said, laughing. "I'll admit, though, the vibes are definitely spooky." His audience watched eagerly, the chat scrolling rapidly with messages urging him to check the dining room or the second floor. Tyler obliged, heading to the dining room first. The table was still set, just as the stories described. Tyler ran his hand over the dusty plates and silverware, grinning. "Look, guys, the ghosts forgot to clear the table after dinner." But as he turned away, the live stream captured something Tyler didn't notice: a faint shadow passing behind him. The chat exploded with comments. "Did you see that? There was something behind you. Bro, get out of there." Unaware, Tyler continued up the creaking staircase to the second floor. He found the infamous bedroom with the four-poster bed and the rocking chair. The broken doll lay on the floor, its cracked face glinting in the beam of his flashlight. "All right, here's the creepy doll everyone talks about," he said, picking it up. "I mean, I get it, it's spooky, but come on. This isn't." Before he could finish, the rocking chair began to move, creaking softly. Tyler froze, staring at it. "Okay, that's weird," he said nervously, his voice shaking for the first time. The chat went wild. "Get out. It's starting." "This isn't a joke, Tyler." The whispers began then, soft, overlapping voices that seemed to come from every corner of the room. Tyler swung his flashlight around, the beam trembling in his hands. "Who's there?" he demanded, his bravado fading. Suddenly, the doll in his hand grew ice cold, and he dropped it with a gasp. The whispers grew louder, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Tyler's breath was visible in the icy air. His flashlight flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," he said, backing toward the door. But the door slammed shut, and a shadow loomed in front of it. The tall man, his face hidden in darkness. The live stream captured Tyler's terrified face as he stumbled back, his phone clattering to the floor. The chat exploded with frantic messages. "Who is that? Tyler, run! Oh my God, what's happening?" The screen went black, and the live stream abruptly ended. The next day, Tyler's Jeep was found parked in front of the lodge, but there was no sign of him. His phone was discovered just inside the front door, its battery dead, but the live stream footage was uploaded to his channel, sparking a media frenzy. Authorities conducted a search of the lodge, but as always, they found nothing. The footage was analyzed by paranormal experts and skeptics alike, but no one could explain the shadowy figure or the whispers captured on the audio. Tyler's disappearance reignited interest in Willow Creek Lodge, but it also solidified its terrifying reputation. Locals in Millersburg warned anyone considering a visit to stay far away, but the lodge seemed to call to the curious, the thrill seekers, and the disbelievers. And so, the cycle continued. To this day, Tyler Grayson's channel remains frozen in time, his final video serving as a chilling reminder of the lodge's power. Those who have watched it claim to hear faint whispers in the background, soft, insistent, and impossible to ignore. And on quiet nights, some swear they see a light flicker in the lodge's second-floor window, as if someone or something is waiting for the next visitor to arrive. Over the years, the legend of Willow Creek Lodge only grew darker, cementing its place as a cursed and malevolent sight. Paranormal enthusiasts continued to theorize about the tall man and the origins of the whispers, while skeptics dismissed the tales as elaborate folklore. But the stories never stopped. Each year brought new accounts of strange disappearances, eerie live streams, and chilling sightings. By 2024, the lodge was a restricted area. Local authorities put up fences and signs warning against trespassing, citing safety concerns due to the structure's decay. But these precautions did little to deter those determined to uncover the truth or satisfy their morbid curiosity. One such individual was Dr. Olivia Rhodes, a professor of folklore and paranormal psychology at a small university in Maine. Olivia had spent decades studying haunted locations, documenting patterns in ghost stories, and debunking myths. Willow Creek Lodge had long fascinated her, not just because of the supernatural claims, but because of the lodge's history, which she believed hinted at something darker than mere ghostly hauntings. On a crisp November evening, Olivia arrived at Millersburg with her assistant, Jacob Tran, a tech expert who specialized in thermal imaging and electromagnetic field (EMF) analysis. Their mission was simple: to spend 12 hours in the lodge and document any phenomena with scientific rigor. This place isn't just haunted, Olivia told Jacob as they approached the property. There's something older here, something forgotten. Jacob frowned. And we're supposed to find it. Olivia nodded, or at least get closer to understanding it. They climbed through a break in the fence and made their way up the overgrown path to the lodge. The air felt heavier with every step, as if the forest itself were warning them to turn back. The lodge stood ahead, shrouded in shadow, its windows dark and lifeless. Olivia paused at the threshold, her breath catching in her throat. "This is it," she murmured, "the heart of the story." Inside, the lodge was cold and silent. Dust hung in the air, illuminated by their flashlights, and the floorboards creaked beneath their boots. Olivia and Jacob set up their equipment. Cameras, motion detectors, thermal scanners, and an array of EMF sensors. As the hours passed, nothing happened. The lodge remained still, its only sounds the occasional groan of settling wood. Jacob grew restless. "Maybe it's just a legend after all," he said, leaning against a wall. But Olivia was staring at the dining room table, her brow furrowed. "Look," she whispered, pointing. The silverware, which had been neatly set on the dusty plates, was now scattered, as if someone or something had swept it aside. Olivia grabbed her notebook, scribbling observations as Jacob checked the camera feeds. "Something's messing with the dining room camera," he said. "The feed keeps glitching." Then came the first whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a breeze moving through a crack in the wall. Olivia froze, tilting her head. "Do you hear that?" Jacob nodded, his eyes wide. He turned up the audio gain on his recorder, and the whisper became clearer. A single word repeated over and over. "Asterisk stay, asterisk." The activity escalated quickly. Lights flickered, and the temperature in the dining room dropped by 10 degrees in seconds. The rocking chair upstairs began to move, captured clearly on one of their cameras. Jacob's EMF meter spiked, the device vibrating in his hand. "It's everywhere," he said, his voice shaking. "The whole building is active." The whispers grew louder, overlapping and echoing, coming from every direction. Olivia grabbed her flashlight and motioned for Jacob to follow her upstairs. "We need to see the bedroom," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They reached the second floor, where the infamous bedroom awaited. The door was ajar, and the faint glow of moonlight spilled onto the hallway floor. Inside, the rocking chair was still moving, and the broken doll lay in the center of the room. Olivia stepped forward cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the walls. They were covered in deep, jagged scratches, as if someone had clawed at them in desperation. She knelt by the doll, her fingers trembling as she picked it up. "It's her," Olivia whispered. "Lillian Harper. She's the key." But before she could elaborate, the door slammed shut, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. The tall man appeared in the corner, his shadow stretching across the room. His face remained obscured, but his presence was overwhelming, filling the air with malice. Jacob backed against the wall, his camera shaking in his hands. "What do we do?" he yelled. Olivia stared at the figure, her voice steady. "You're protecting something," she said to it. "What is it? Why are you still here?" The tall man raised his hand, and the floor began to crack, revealing the same dark void described in countless accounts. Faint cries echoed from within, and ghostly hands reached out, clawing at the air. Jacob screamed, dropping his camera as he was pulled toward the void. Olivia grabbed his arm, pulling him back with all her strength. "No," she shouted. "You can't have him." The tall man tilted his head, as if considering her defiance. The whispers stopped suddenly, replaced by an oppressive silence. Then, without warning, the figure disappeared, and the room went still. At dawn, Olivia and Jacob stumbled out of the lodge, shaken but alive. They retrieved their equipment and drove away in silence, leaving the cursed property behind. Weeks later, Olivia reviewed the footage. The recordings were chilling. The whispers, the moving chair, the shadowy figure. But one frame stood out, a still image captured just before the tall man appeared. It showed the dining room table, but instead of the plates and silverware, it held an open diary. Scrawled across the pages in dark ink were the words, "Asterisk, it will never end, asterisk." Olivia knew she couldn't leave the mystery unsolved, but she also understood the cost of returning. The lodge wasn't just haunted, it was alive, a malevolent force feeding on those who dared to challenge it. To this day, the lodge stands waiting, its dark secrets buried within its walls. And for those who venture too close, the whispers begin again, growing louder, until the lodge decides it's time to take another soul.